Thank you for the invitation. Nordic regional cooperation within art and culture has many forms, one of which is the political one. And under the auspices of the Nordic Council of Ministers, a cooperation between the Nordic governments. And there is also the Nordic Council, representing the parliaments or the parliamentarians. That is to say, all the parties present in the Nordic parliament at each moment. Before I start, let me tell you what I'm talking about when I say Nordic or Nordic region. There are 25 million people living there. If we include the people in the Baltic countries, we are talking about 30 million people. I'm talking about an area which stretches from the west coast of Greenland to the eastern part of Norway, let's say Kirkenes, and to eastern Finland in the east, from Hammerfest in the north to south of Denmark, or even to Vilnius in the south. I'm talking about an area which has 5 hours time difference from west to east. Nordic cooperation can never be only about what is happening in the Nordic capitals. For those of you who may think that the small areas do not produce the interesting stuff, I would like to remind you that there are about, as far as I heard this morning, 260,000 people living in Reykjavik and its bigger area or its surrounding. And I think it has been mentioned several times here today that there is quite a lot of interesting stuff going on. It may also help to remind, or if we try to remember, that the Icelandic sagas were not created in a big capital city. So where is the center and where is the periphery? I will try to give you an overview of what has been and is happening in the official Nordic cultural cooperation in the field of culture. I will focus on the last 4 years and we'll look at the cooperation from where I'm located in the system today, which is, as was mentioned, as a director for the Nordic Culture Point, which I will maybe call NCP during the talk. Kulturkontakt Nord, it might be known to some of you, or in Icelandic, Norræna menningargátin, which I think is the best word actually. Very Icelandic and descriptive. NCP is an administrative organ. It's an institution defined as a part of Nordic Council of Ministers, located in Suomenlinna or Sveaborg, outside Helsinki in Finland. The task of the NCP was defined at the end of 2006, but has since then been altered or adjusted several times. The main activities of NCP are, first of all, to administer the programs supporting art and culture, to inform about Nordic cultural cooperation, and general administration. The Nordic system of cultural cooperation has not always been easy to understand. Leading up to the reform in 2007, the cooperation was discussed on several levels, and the diagram that you see here was just one of the many attempts to get an overview of how the structure looked pre-2007. You see NIFCA often mentioned here, somewhere there. The structure can be said to have been relatively fragmented and not very transparent. The art forms had each their separate institutions or, in many cases, committees, and there was not much interaction between them. One of the things I've done in the past is to sit in the NOMUS committee, which is the music parallel to NIFCA. Art forms or expressions that did not fit into the system fell between the chairs and were not supported. They did not belong. Additionally, the administrative costs involved in maintaining the system that you see here in front of you had grown out of proportions. What cannot be seen on this illustration is that several of the institutions and committees had a double role. With one hand, they created and financed directly their own projects. With the other hand, they granted money to projects based on applications from outside. They did, in other words, directly and indirectly, compete with outside applicants. The result, after intense discussion, led to a new structure, which in the beginning looked something like this. This is how it was defined the structure at the end of 2006. There should be one administrative organ called Nordic Culture Point, administering all the programs, which were 2, as well as taking care of various administrative tasks, as I mentioned. It was absolutely not to be a policy function involved. All policy decisions were placed in the Civil Servant Committee in a Nordic language, a Scandinavian language called IKK, on this picture that you see. It had of course been there before as well, but institutional and committee freedom had resulted in many policy decisions within the cultural field being taken outside the political system. This was seen as being unfortunate. The final say lies now, as before, with the ministers of culture in the Nordic countries. The Nordic Council of Ministers Secretariat, which you see there illustrated also, is the organ that serves the Civil Servants Committee. It is, in other words, the Secretariat at the Nordic Council of Ministers which is responsible for all the footwork in policy matters. The department dealing with cultural matters is, from this fall 2010, also dealing with resources. This means that culture, fishing, forestry, and equal right issues are now combined in one department. The new structure was intended to save money on the administrative side and to increase the amount going directly to the arts. Institutions run by Nordic Council of Ministers should stop competing with the art world by creating their own projects. The creation and production should be taken care of by the field with financial support from the Nordic Council of Ministers in this case. All the art forms were embedded in the same structure in the 2 programs, making it easy for interartistic projects to receive support, and new expressions had the same possibility as older ones. No sooner had this structure been defined when it started to change. In other words, this structure didn't have a long life. The computer program, the computer game program, was from the very beginning established in Sweden. In other words, there should be a very, very clear line there between the programs and the computer game program. Support for translation of literature, which was initiated by the Art and Culture Committee in the beginning of 2007, has been removed from the programs. Initially, it was located at the Nordic House, or should have been here in Iceland, but it has been moved back to the Nordic Council of Ministers office in Copenhagen. The new initiative, which some of you were discussing over lunch today, called Kreanur, or dealing with creative industries, the creative economy, the creative one thing and another, is also located at the Secretariat in Copenhagen. Still another new initiative called the Northern Dimension, Partnership in Culture, which is a cooperative thing between Iceland, Norway, Russia, EU, and now slowly also the Nordic cooperation, is also placed within the Secretariat in Copenhagen. The last new program I want to mention to you is the new Nordic food program, which has been established and is placed in the Nordic House in Iceland. What was to be an integrated system, relatively easy to navigate, has gradually become more fragmented, heading in the direction of the old one. The difference is that while institutions and committees had their home in different Nordic countries, new initiatives today are more often than not placed within the Secretariat in Copenhagen, within the Office of the Nordic Council of Ministers. The function of the cultural system have become more centralized. The programs themselves have also been changed, but I will come to that later. So let me tell you a little bit about the programs. There are two of them. The one, the Art and Culture program, including 2 modules, which was founded at the beginning of 2007. The main focus of the programs until the end of 2011 is that they are intended for all fields of art and culture. Artistic quality is emphasized. There are no age limits. There are no quotas, neither geographic nor artistic. Color of passport is completely irrelevant, but country of residence is relevant. When looking at the programs, it should be kept in mind that the money allocated is Nordic taxpayers' money. It should therefore not come as a surprise that the focus is on how to increase Nordic cooperation, create an extra Nordic value, if you may, by giving a project a Nordic dimension. The support can never be more than a supplement to national, private, or other types of funding. A prerequisite for support from the Nordic programs is, as a rule, that there are 3 countries participating. With a strong Nordic theme or content, there is a possibility for a 2-country participation only. Both programs can also include cooperation with countries outside the Nordic Baltic area, and increasingly we see that as happening. So, the 2 programs. First, the Nordic Baltic Mobility Program for Culture, which since 2009 does also include the 3 Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Keep in mind that it was a political decision to focus on these 3 areas, which are mobility, networks, and residencies. And before 2009, that is to say the first 2 years, 2007 and 2008, it was only a Nordic program. The Baltics state did not belong there. The mobility module in this program is about study or working trips from one country to another. In some cases, one can only receive support for accommodation, whereas travel cost is only covered between the western part of the region and the rest, as well as within the Baltic countries and between the Baltic and Nordic countries. These rules have caused debates and frustration, to put it mildly. As an example, I can give, for example, why does the program give travel support from Helsinki to Tallinn, a 90-minute boat ride, but not between Helsinki and Kirkenes, a considerable more complicated and expensive trip, but it doesn't. The network module, when it comes to the networks, the panel of experts they have in this program have strongly emphasized new ways of thinking about network and networking, not only across geographical borders, but equally important across disciplines, and not least new ways of working together. And then it's the Residency Module, the last of the three. Support is given directly to the residency centers, who in turn grant 2 to 4 Nordic and/or Baltic artist residency each year. The accommodation can last maximum 2 months. The selection of artists is completely in the hands of the centers themselves. The changes made to the program since the beginning in 2007 are two. It was decided at the end of 2009 that the experts appointed for 3 years at the beginning of 2007 should continue until 2011. Their mandate was extended to last for 5 years, as not 3 as originally intended. At the beginning of 2009, as I mentioned earlier, the 3 Baltic countries came and became a part of the program on equal footing. And with that came also that the 3 experts were added to the programs. And we go on and look at the other program, the Culture and Art program. The changes made to this program were implemented at the end of 2009. Originally, this program was called the Art and Culture program, but it was changed at the end of last year, and it has now a new name, Culture and Art Program. The program was originally for professionals only. This was changed also at the end of 2009. From the beginning of 2010, the program has also been open for amateurs as well as voluntary organizations within the field of culture. It has 3 priority areas, which were also introduced at the beginning of this year, end of last. They are children and youth, Nordic culture, Nordic cultural heritage, and cultural diversity. The funding of product, there are 2 modules in this program. One of them focuses on the production of different forms of productions, different kind of artworks, projects, and initiatives. These can be small or large, lasting from only a few days up to 3 years. The other module is called capacity building. What this supports is seminars, for example, like the one we are attending today, workshops, master classes, and different kind of courses. Starting this fall, 2 firms have been engaged by the Nordic Council of Ministers to evaluate the 2007 cultural reform and/or parts of it. The result of the Nordic-Baltic cooperation is being evaluated by a company called Safnstjórar from Latvia, and at the same time the structure as a whole, as well as the programs, are being evaluated by Telemarkforskning in Norway. The result of the evaluation will be presented during the first part of next year, 2011. First to the Council of Ministers Secretariat, and then to the Civil Servants Committee, EKK, who in return will prepare proposals based on the results of the evaluation to the first meeting of the Ministers of Culture taking place in the spring next year. While the evaluation is taking place, there are questions being asked and various themes being discussed. I would like to present to you a few of the themes in order to make sure that if you're not already participating in the discussion, you will at least know what is being discussed. I would like to remind you that when 2007 reform was being announced, there was a considerable debate about the new system. It was not a popular one, particularly not by those who had known the old system well and had previously enjoyed some of its privileges. Unfortunately, the discussion died out pretty quickly. So what are some of the questions being discussed today? And I emphasize these are only a few examples, it's no complete list. First, let's look at how the applications are handled, how the decisions for grants are made, who decides really. And in that respect, the most frequent question asked is about the arm's length principle. How far-reaching are the political and administrative arms? Who is it really that makes a decision about who and what is supported? I mentioned before that the definition of the central principles and priorities is a political one. The experts, with the help from the administrators of the Nordic Council of Ministers Secretariat, made up the guidelines for the programs in the beginning. The experts have since then adjusted some of the guidelines for granting of support. The handling of the applications takes place behind closed doors, and it is only the experts that can read, comment, and decide, in other words, influence the final outcome. If we, on the other hand, look at the system used by the Nordic Council of Ministers, it is very different. Now I'm talking about the system for the Nordic Cultural Fund, which is another. It's the parliamentarians who own that part of the cooperation. There, it is the board that makes the final decisions on who and what is supported. The bigger applications are sent out to one expert in the relevant field. The person gives an expert opinion, which the board may or may not agree with. The board of the Nordic Culture Fund, making the final decision, is for the most part composed of civil servants. So the two systems are very different, and the arms are both of different type and different length. The cultural reform of 2007 included a communication tool called Culture Forum. Each year, several meetings were to be held where the field, artists and cultural workers could meet together with the policy and decision makers to discuss various cultural and cultural political issues. The field should be given a platform where their voice could be heard, and the policy makers a place to go for advice and for inspiration. For some reason, the number of the artists and cultural workers that have participated in these fora has been relatively low. I want to leave you with some questions. Is there a need to change the system of the Nordic Council of Ministers granting support for artists and cultural workers? What do you think the role of the politicians should be in such a system? How should the experts be selected? Who should define the principles and priorities regarding the granting of support? Last but not least, do you want to influence its future? And then how do you want to do that? Thank you.